The courtroom was silent. A silence so thick, it felt like glass. One sharp breath could shatter it. Cameras flashed in rhythmic bursts, echoing like distant lightning. Reporters pressed closer, hearts hammering as two of the nation's most beloved actors stepped forward under the pale glare of truth's spotlight. Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan. Their faces were drawn, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and the unbearable weight of what they were about to reveal. Before them, the great seal of the Supreme Court shimmered under the fluorescent lights, a cold symbol of justice, ready to receive a confession the world was never meant to hear. Yibo's voice was the first to break the silence. Steady, low, trembling with restrained fire.
"We were there," he said.
"We saw what they did to you, Menglong, and we helped cover it up." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a tidal wave. Pens froze, microphones trembled, and even the judge's gavel seemed to hesitate midair. Zhan closed his eyes. When he spoke, his words came like shattered glass, each one glinting with sorrow and defiance. "We didn't kill him," he said, "but our silence did." The room erupted, shouts, flashes, chaos, but the two men stood unmoving, as though they had stepped out of time. Every camera lens tried to capture their faces, but there was something untouchable in their expression, grief laced with steel. The Supreme Court released the footage moments later, the crime scene reenactment that shook a nation. It wasn't fiction, nor was it simple testimony. It was a reconstruction built from Menglong's recovered files, his final recordings, and the fragments of truth that Yibo and Zhan had pieced together at unbearable cost. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. Menglong appeared first, alive, calm, sitting at his desk, pen in hand. The air around him glowed faintly, as though the past itself was bleeding through the frame. His eyes met the camera, unblinking, fearless. "If you see this, truth has finally found its voice," his voice echoed. "They think I will die forgotten. They're wrong." The video shifted. The reenactment began. A narrow corridor. The hum of hidden machinery. Shadows moved, figures in masks, voices low, urgent. Then a scuffle, a single cry of fall. It was not graphic, but it was haunting. Every second felt real, because it was built from Menglong's final recordings, matched with the confessions and timelines Yibo and Zhan had risked everything to reveal. The spectators could barely breathe. It was not just a crime scene. It was a resurrection. Yibo stood rigid as the images played. He remembered the night Menglong vanished, the coded message he'd ignored, the unanswered call. Zhan's hand trembled, memories flooding back like ghosts whispering through his veins. They had lived with this truth for months, hiding behind smiles, burying guilt beneath performance and fame. Now, under the eyes of millions, they were finally letting the truth consume them. When the reenactment ended, the courtroom was silent again. Not a single flash, not a single cough, just the deafening hum of realization. Zhan rose slowly. "We carried a secret," he said, voice cracking. "We thought silence would protect us, but silence became our prison." Yibo added quietly, This is how we free him." Outside, crowds gathered. Fans, skeptics, mourners, all staring at giant screens streaming the confession live. Some wept openly. Others stood frozen, unable to process that the idols they adored had stepped willingly into the fire of truth. And yet, in that moment, something miraculous happened. Instead of condemnation, there was understanding. People began to chant Menglong's name, not as a fallen actor, but as a symbol, a martyr of truth. Inside the court, the judge's gavel fell, not in punishment, but in recognition. Their crime, she said, voice resonant, was silence. Their redemption, truth. The two men bowed their heads, tears glinting like broken stars. But it didn't end there. A new piece of footage emerged that same night, a recording no one expected. In it, Menglong's voice was softer, almost tender, speaking from somewhere between confession and farewell. "If they ever stand before the world for me, forgive them. They did what I asked them to do." They protected my truth until it was strong enough to stand alone. The nation held its breath. The next morning, a torrential rain fell across Beijing. Mourners flooded the streets, lighting candles beneath black umbrellas. The sound of raindrops merged with whispered prayers, and for a moment, the entire city seemed to move in rhythm with a ghost. Iba and John stood among them, not as stars, but as men stripped bare of illusion. They visited the memorial garden where Menglong's ashes were scattered, kneeling in silence as cameras stayed respectfully distant. Iba whispered, "You planned even this, didn't you?" Jean smiled faintly through his tears. He always saw further than we did. They placed their hands on the marble stone engraved with Menglong's final words, "Truth is not what survives us. It is what we become when we stop running." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain softened, the sky brightened, and a faint wind brushed the edge of Menglong's memorial photo, making it flutter gently, like a heartbeat returning for one last farewell. Later that week, the Supreme Court released the full documentary reconstruction, a meticulous combination of Menglong's recordings, the actors' confessions, and evidence retrieved from sealed archives. The film was titled "The Light That Wouldn't Die." It spread across the world in hours. Film festivals, universities, and advocacy groups began screening it as a testament to integrity and courage. Critics called it the line where art and truth collide. Behind the applause, Iba and Jean lived quietly, far from the cameras. They had given everything: their fame, their peace, their anonymity. But in return, they had reclaimed something far greater: their humanity. Some nights, Iba returned to Menglong's apartment, now preserved as a private archive. He would sit at the desk, where that final letter once rested, tracing the ink stains on the wood. He swore he could still hear Menglong humming softly, as he used to before every shoot, a melody that spoke of hope even in despair. Jean, meanwhile, took up Menglong's unfinished charity projects, funding scholarships, supporting young filmmakers, building platforms for those silenced by power. In every act, he felt Menglong's invisible hand guiding him forward. One evening, they met again, two friends bound by loss and redemption. They stood on the rooftop of the studio where they'd once filmed together, watching the sunset bleed into gold and crimson. Jean turned to Iba. "Do you ever wonder," he said softly, "if he's watching us right now?" Iba smiled faintly, eyes glistening.
He is.
But not from above. From within. He never left. The city lights flickered below, alive with movement, with stories, with echoes of a man who had refused to be erased. A gust of wind swept across the rooftop, scattering the petals from the flowers they'd brought. They rose into the twilight like tiny spirits, dancing above the skyline, whispering a single message carried on the wind, one Menglong had written long ago: "Let them bury my body, but not my voice." As the last light faded, Iba and Jean stood side by side, not as the accused, not as the fallen, but as the keepers of an immortal flame. In every whispered prayer, every candle lit in his name, every tear shed by strangers who finally knew the truth, Yu Menglong lived again, beyond the screen, beyond the grave, beyond time itself. And the world, having seen the reenactment that shattered illusions, finally understood. This was not a tragedy, but a resurrection. The truth had not died in silence. It had been reborn in confession. The courtroom air was heavy, almost tangible, thick with the scent of polished wood and human fear. Every camera, every eye, every heart was locked on the two men standing before the bench. Wang Iba and Xiaozhan. Not as idols, not as untouchable stars, but as men, fragile, haunted, and cornered by truth. The judge's gavel had not yet fallen, but silence had already declared its reign. You could hear the hum of the lights, the distant echo of air conditioning, even the whisper of breath as Iba exhaled slowly, steadying himself for the confession that would ignite a storm across the nation. He raised his eyes, meeting the sea of faces before him, lawyers, journalists, spectators, all waiting to devour every word. "I was there," Eba began, his voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to pierce the silence. "The night you Menglong died." A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, whispers ignited. But Eba didn't flinch. His voice grew stronger, fueled by something deeper than courage, remorse. "I saw the truth," he continued, eyes glimmering with restrained tears. "And I chose silence.